surfaces, which is super exciting. Jake has a very long history with UCL, going back many years. I've known Jake for quite a while. He's one of our star master's graduates, which is great to see that he's actually set up a company, and that's very interesting to hear. Wei, I don't know so much about Wei, but hopefully she can tell us a lot about herself when she starts. She's got a very illustrious career from Columbia, Harvard, etc., and also Chicago as well. So I'm very interested to hear what you've got to say. So Wei, I think you're going to start us off, is that right?
So the original plan is for Jake to go first, but if he's still trying to figure out the login, I can start first and talk about.
That'd be great. Thank you, Wei.
Okay, yeah, let me share the screen. Does it show up okay?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, let me view the full screen. Yeah, so good afternoon, everybody. So let me just go through my research, which Jake sorry, so Jake reached out to me because we happen to be working on almost exactly the same topic. So, he would talk about his work, but just let me start with, it's not 39 pages, about 10 pages, but just going over a recent paper that I have written with 3 co-authors, we're all from the US side. So, what motivated us is to think about whether the concept is about a contest between man versus machine. We should be envisioning a future where man and machine could work together with a better outcome. Now, everybody knows about Deep Blue and the AlphaGo. When it seems we probably no longer have any suspense, then the machine is going to beat us in a game like a Go or like chess. But the interesting thing is that human beings, or especially the young generation, does not seem to have lost interest in the game of chess at all. And in fact, the overall level of the next generation has, Jake is here. Jake, do you want to take over?
Hi, Wei. Sorry about that, everybody. I had a problem getting into Zoom for some reason.
Yeah. So I just started. Why don't you just take over? I can go after you.
Okay, dokes. Okay. Yeah. Well, I've got it all lined up that way. So thanks, Wei.
Okay. Right. So I'll share and you can share.
There we go. Right. Let's get back to this. Okay. So yeah, just bear with me a sec, everybody. I just had to log off, log on, and update to Zoom. So let's do a screen share. Here we go. Right, I'm not sure what you said so far, Wei. I don't know what you've told everybody.
Very little. We just talk about the general concept of man versus machine and man plus machine. You can take from there.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, so first of all, thanks to UCL AI Centre for hosting us today. Let me see if I can get some of these bits out of the way so you can actually see the screen. And particularly Lopa and Sarah for organising, and everyone who's dialed in. Apologies for the slight delay. I'm Jake, CEO of 3AI. We're a company dedicated to identifying and solving problems in finance using machine learning. Obviously delighted to welcome Professor Wei Zhang of Columbia Business School to join us today. Professor Zhang is a leading finance scholar with extensive publications in top economics and finance journals, and as I understand, a range of award-winning courses in empirical finance and investing. And recently, one of her most recent research papers was into an area of overlap with work that we're actually doing at 3AI at the moment as well. So there was an interesting opportunity to invite her along today to speak with us. So we're delighted she could join. So agenda, we've got a fairly meaty agenda. I want to talk about applying machine learning to two particular problems, one optimizing balance sheets and one stock picking. Then we have a live challenge that we've run for over a year of AI versus industry experts, which then leads nicely into Way's work of man v machine, man plus machine. And then at the end, it'd be nice to open up for a discussion and let anybody ask questions, answer questions, and get everybody's thoughts out. So, does that work for you, Way? All good. Okay. So, just touching a little bit on superhuman AI in games. I'm sure we're all familiar with the developments that have happened, the more recent ones of which UCL alumni played a key role in. But I think the other pattern here with the evolution of superhuman AI in games is going from games of perfect information to games of non-perfect information. The two problems I touched on today, the first one is a game of perfect information. The second, which is stock picking, is a game of imperfect information or non-perfect. To be clear, Alpha Star isn't yet, as I understand, at superhuman level, but it is at Grandmaster level, which is pretty good. So maybe high human, according to AI classification. So the first problem we're going to touch on is optimizing balance sheets. And the balance sheet problem is a quite complex one, has a number of pieces, which is the kind of assets, liabilities, and internal constraints that the company puts on themselves. Who does balance sheet optimization? We're talking about financial services companies, and the largest 750 in the world, their combined asset value is larger than global GDP. So optimizing insurance and bank balance sheets is a very big problem. The pieces are kind of things they can move. So that's really how they do their business. The board is kind of, or we could think of as objectives, assumptions, and metrics, like what they're trying to do. They're trying to maximize capital or profit, that kind of thing. And then obviously we have rules, which is regulatory constraints and or other constraints that come upon their business. Basically, balance sheet optimization, one way to think about it is kind of like Tetris on steroids. So you have a load of different bonds, typically bonds that the financial services company is trying to match up against their liability profile. The liability profile for a long-term liabilities looks a bit like this. So like for an annuity provider, where we've done this kind of application before, liabilities run off over time. The estimated complexity from picking from hundreds or thousands of bonds in particular examples that we looked at was about 10 to 1,890, which is a sufficiently large problem as to not be excludable by brute force. So the problem looks a little bit like the kind of traveling salesman problem, which is kind of problem 101 when you look into when you do evolutionary computing courses. The traveling salesman problem, the best results were found to come from evolutionary computing. Again, this is a problem not really solvable by brute force. But when we think back to balance sheet optimization, we very much have the same kind of thing. We're selecting a big strip from thousands of bonds. How can we map that to GA, for example, which is what we did? Well, we can actually think of each bond as a string in, like a chromosome, and then do, crossover and mutation, and obviously need to code up all of the elements of that game, which in that case is quite complicated because at the moment in that particular game, in an insurance company, actuaries are playing that game. And they're usually a little small ivory tower. So they'd be like a team of 5 people or something. And the problem's not really seen to people outside of the field. So machine learning practitioners wouldn't be aware of that problem, wouldn't even see the data because it's proprietary to the company. And even within the company itself, people outside of the asset liability management team that do balance sheet optimization wouldn't be specifically aware of the mechanics of that game and how it's being played. Likewise, your typical ALM team is not versed currently in cloud engineering, somewhat on separate to the IT department, which would be versed in cloud engineering and not typically versed in machine learning. So you've got a multi-layered complexity. It's kind of like double deep AI in a way, or double deep tech, because you have to first map, codify, and put into software form, essentially, or into a computationally effective form, the stuff that they develop at the moment. They spend a lot of time interpreting the regulations, a lot of time working with the regulator on the assumptions they use, and actually a very small percentage of their time actually into optimizing the balance sheet itself. So I think when we did this, to our awareness, it had never been done before using machine learning to optimize the balance sheet. I did see one reference to it in a paper about 10 years ago as an idea, and then nobody ever referenced back to that idea. I didn't see that paper until after we'd done it, but it was quite clear after studying with Herbster, who used to do the evolutionary computing course, Mark Herbster, that this was a problem well fit for evolutionary computing. This is a kind of like, we've got a little like video here. I mean, you have to excuse our kind of like aesthetics here. We haven't, but none of us are graphic designers. But basically here, the way because it's a complex multi-optimization problem and you're trying to optimize like profit, capital, and liquidity, one of the challenges with multi-objectives is actually how do you combine objectives when they're in completely different scales. What we would tend to use is to actually percentile those results within its own objective as those results come back through the evolutionary process. So we're then able to weight between the percentile of the performance within the objectives, like in this particular case, it's looking across 3, and the machine learning is then able to effectively trade off in very different scales. It's able to effectively trade off these multi-objectives and achieve optimization as a singular objective, which is needed for the kind of algorithm. That was just showing there the like evolutionary results on a balance sheet. What is really the outcome of that? Well, this is proxied from real data that we've looked at, but this is an example of discovered capital boosting and profit boosting. The profit has the words IFRS, that's the International Financial Reporting Standards. Capital has words Solvency II, that's solvency regulations, EU directives, which is basically still being adopted. And what we see there, the insurer at the bottom left in orange is at 0,0 because that's its current position. What we discovered with the genetic algorithms for essentially selecting which bonds and gilts to be held, when applied to 2 different balance sheets, was discovery of essentially like a new efficient frontier. It's not presumably the efficient frontier, and we would never really know if we'd found that unless we could search that whole space. But it's certainly a more efficient frontier than where the insurer was at the point that we ran that. So off the back of that as well, what was discovered was new strategies for which assets to deploy. And essentially the genetic algorithm was discovering the interaction between all the different bonds and gilts and all of the effects that are happening whilst working with the constraints that were set there by the insurance company. And in fact, it was quite interesting that the GA would typically eat up every bit of allowable tolerance that was given to it, it pushed things right to the limit. So if one was searching to optimize profit, for example, and allowed a max of 50% of bonds to be BBB, which is for an insurer quite a low rating, quite a risky rating, then quite typically it would actually push to 49.997% or something BBB bonds. So it really hones in and laser focuses on the optimization problem and within its constraints. Now, the thing that I wanted to mention about this was that the process of developing this was actually not that difficult. It was really just a kind of like a leapfrog of realization, oh, this is an optimization problem, we can code it and we can put genetic algorithms to it. But I think the results that came back kind of shocked us because we didn't know it would be able to achieve the matching accuracy it did. It removed the need for a process that insurers have called hypothecation, where they have to slice bond parts up to match it to liabilities. We realized we could do it with whole bonds pretty much, like 99.9% accuracy. So there'd be very little need for a process that they currently adopt, which enables a great increase in efficiency. But the following on from there, it kind of opened up a new, how can I describe it? It kind of opened in a new level of visibility or vision or management information for the company. So suddenly the company could, by being able to see its own efficient frontier and where it could be as a balance sheet, was able to understand the trade-off between capital and profit, but also was able to understand other deeper level questions, like, for example, what's the optimal level of new business to write? How does that impact upon the balance sheet? And therefore, how can I infer that back into pricing? Or having a reinsurance agreement that provides some protection also has the constraints that come with it, and realizing the constraints that came with it caused more damage in reduction in ability to be efficient on the balance sheet than actually the amount insured by that reinsurance. So and then each one of those questions then spurned new, if you like, applications of essentially evolutionary computing and bringing those problems into the domain and adding it up. And when you think about it, what starts as like a local optimization problem only gets better the more global it becomes and the more elements that you pull in. So a whole kind of ALM framework was on the process being developed to start to bring everything kind of together, which actually also uses more of the human expertise within the company, because suddenly you're one of the challenges in large corporations is that you have different experts. In the case of an insurance company or a bank, some will focus on the kind of solvency, risk, some will focus on profit, some will focus on different elements of profit, economic, which is expected, versus reported profit, which is a bit more prudent. And they're quite often different heads that they think differently. They don't necessarily interact that well with each other or necessarily fully understand how each other thinks. And so you get these kind of like what I call the multi-headed Hydra problem. What you're able to do once you start building singular objectives that bring multiple objectives in is actually getting much more efficient optimization solutions as well. So number of learning and benefits coming out of that kind of approach of applying optimization there. And I think I've probably covered most of them. I think one of the things I'd say is that generally speaking, I think people outside of machine learning are unaware of the power of machine learning as an optimization tool. And I mean, actually, to some degree, we could hark back to evolution and life on Earth, and I think we have the clearest example there of optimization, which is the evolution of life. I mean, people often say like, oh, isn't it amazing the Earth is perfect for us? Well, actually, no, I think we've probably evolved to be perfect for Earth. But seeing here the complexity of the problem that the machine learning was able to solve and the effectiveness with which it did it was really quite astonishing, both for me and for the chief investment officer of that particular company. Now, a couple of things I want to really look at here is, one is that optimization really can be used to enhance the value of human subject matter expertise. I think that's a really key thing. And we could think of many other problems where human subject matter expertise kind of gets somewhat neglected. And I think government is one of the big ones for that. And if we go to higher level optimization that brings different measurement, different models, different understanding into the whole, we can really do a lot of good for humanity as a whole in many different fields. Now, I think one of the other things, if I look at number 6 there, another realization that came out is if we think beyond this particular problem that we've approached, but we think to wider problems, again, like government or the environment, that kind of thing. One of the problems we actually have in the world, and we've probably had it for a very long time as humans, is power being held by single individuals to make decisions. And I think machine learning based optimization that also plugs in all the human subject matter expertise as detailed understanding as best we have it of the different elements that we're trying to measure. The optimization, if we get the objective function right, really then plugs that human subject matter expertise back into our optimization as a global objective. So that global could be national, it could be within a corporation, it could be cross-border, etc. So and then if I look at number 7 there quickly, the other one is to more time is then spent once these kind of optimization these complex optimization problems are coded up. More time is then spent on actually thinking about the objective function. What are we actually trying to achieve? How can we measure it? And then using the machine learning to actually get to solutions. Now, when we think about actuaries talking about balance sheet optimization, each one of them is playing a different game. They hold different assets, they hold different liabilities, but they will meet at a table and they'll have coffees and they'll discuss it at specialist groups. But they're all playing different board games. So what one's discovery might be doesn't necessarily apply directly to the other insurer. These are very bespoke, typically very bespoke solutions. So yeah, I would probably touch on a few of these, but when I think to what I call here like large optimization problems, where we're trying to maximize or minimize a set of things which are measured through something complex, subject to some constraints, there's a number that really jump out at me as optimization problems. One of the first ones actually, and probably the most similar to balance sheet optimization, is allocating national budgets. The national budget is a limited amount of capital, which could also be borrowed or invested, and is assigned across a diverse range of different things: health, education, military, social and arts, ventures, education, blah, 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 and we go on and on. How is that done right now, and is it efficient? Well, it definitely is not done very well right now, and is definitely not done efficiently, because I don't think the setting of national budgets is able to properly trade off all the different interaction effects, and to understand the marginal gain of each additional dollar or pound and where that's allocated. So if moving to doing something like evolutionary computing to allocate national budgets would immediately then open up the next question, which is, to be able to optimize it, we need to be able to measure, define, and analyze the different impacts of different budgets into different areas, and to be able to cross transfer that. So we need to be able to bring these objective measures together, like the value of a river and not polluting it versus the value of a child getting cancer treatment of the highest level versus second rate level, versus buying a upgrading the nuclear submarine or whatever. But being able to actually it forces, by being very specific and data driven, it forces the self-realization often that we haven't really well defined and measured things, which also then forces us to go back to the experts in all the different fields and get out of them all the information and all the understanding, and start to measure all the things that are important, so we can actually build that system. In this case, a national budget, investment, a capital allocation in a box type thing. There's many other areas as well, like like minimizing global species extinction is an interesting one, because we're in the middle of a massive global species extinction event. There's probably been 5 or 6, I think, in history, and we should really be seeking to minimize that. But what's the cost for different rates of species extinction around the world? And if we go down to something that's not trying to save the world or change the world particularly, but probably quite an obvious one, number 6, is like legal and accounting advice, because both of these things operate within very clearly defined frameworks, and usually have quite clear objectives. So in a lot of cases, a lawyer or an accountant is really trying to do an optimization problem. They're probably not as able to effectively search the solution space as a genetic algorithm or other evolutionary computing or other type of algorithm for optimization would be able to do. So the next one I'll move on to is learning stock picking. So this is quite interesting, actually. This here, if we look at this chart here, what we have there is 20 years of S&P 500 data. So roughly speaking, there's about 10,000 data points on there, except yes, 10,000 data points on there. And what we have on the left axis is US dollar 1 year returns sorted low to high within the year. And then on the bottom, we have the earnings yield of stocks sorted low to high, again within the year. So everything is effectively percentile from 0 to 1. Now, the interesting thing here is if we think about a professional investor, this could be equivalent to the bulk of their career if they looked at and correctly remembered all of the S&P 500 stocks over 20 years. So we've got 10,000 stock years there. But we don't actually have a signal. So if we look at this, there isn't statistical evidence of any pattern there on a linear basis, and certainly virtually on no other bases either. So what happens if we look at 1 million years of stock data? When we look at 1 million years of stock data, we do see a pattern. We're looking at a lot more data now, certainly more than a human would be able to look at or experience. But we only see 1.73% explanation on a linear. So that's the correlation squared. And so it's a small amount of information, but it is showing that stocks with higher earnings yield, i.e. those that have more profit last year as a function of price, so you get more bang for the buck, so to speak, on average perform slightly better, but the evidence for it is irrefutable. So that pattern with that amount of data points is a 1 in 232 million by chance that you would get something that strong. So we're completely sure that there's a very, very weak pattern there. And when if we extend that and we create an algorithmic method that effectively uses polynomials, understands the statistical properties of the polynomials, understands the overarching algorithm that goes through it in somewhat of a stepwise routine, but is sufficiently robust as to only identify statistically certain patterns, then we find these other types of patterns looking at different feature types. And it's interesting because looking at 1 million years of stock data, the patterns we see are really, really simple patterns that are things that remind me of what one of the world's top investors, Charlie Munger, said when asked why people don't teach, why people don't copy what they do at Berkshire Hathaway, which, if you don't know, is one of the run by Warren Buffett, one of the world's most successful investors. And Charlie Munger said, I think the reason no one copies us is because it seems too damn simple. And I think there's some truth in that. And I think we see that here in this data. So we see, if we look at the x-axis in these charts, we see the percentile of each metric versus the whole market. And on the right axis, the adjustment to the average stock rank, effectively as a function of that particular metric. Now, these are visualizable because we're not yet into kind of conditional machine learning. We're just into nonlinear. But the point is that it does look that stocks are learnable with sufficient data. And it looks like stocks probably misteach us with a human amount of data. The conclusion of that for us is that basically stocks are a big data sport. You have very weak evidence and you need to see a shed load of data to see it. And I guess one of the things that we've done here as well is to really focus on data that is what we call homogeneous stock data. So it's data that you could apply to each company. So a profit of $1 is the same thing for every company, that a 20% price move is the same thing for every company, analyst ratings, same thing for every company. So we haven't particularly delved into sentiment the same for every company, psychological and other measures of how people perceive a company the same for every company. But we've really tried to focus on stuff that ties back to the machine of what a company is as a kind of cash printing or destruction machine. So here we look at, again, 1 million years of data, but now we've got two features, if you like. So earnings yield on the down, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but earnings yield down here on the bottom right, and on the bottom left, 6-month essentially price momentum. Again, they're all percentiled within the time, and then performance up there on the left. Again, it's quite hard to discern that by eye, what's going on there, but for that particular data set, I can quickly put something like a support vector regression and see what's going on, which is a kind of subtle truth. And that subtle truth actually is that there is an interaction of X between kind of earnings yield and momentum. And it's not actually the stocks that are rising the fastest that are the cheapest, that are the very best, but something around about the 90th percentile in each. Probably because stocks that are maybe, well, I could hypothesize 1,000 different reasons for what we see here. And I have done, but so I'm going to. So if we go post that kind of 3D view, every stock essentially becomes a research hypothesis. So like, here's an example here: very high earnings yield, declining goodwill as a proportion of tangible assets, weak short-term but strong long-term momentum. Momentum is change in price of stock with a high structural credit default risk, but no indications of risk in text documents, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Every single stock is like a story within homogeneous stock data. And then we have a lot of this data now. So that really, ideally, if I wanted to research all the world's stocks, I would want to do this bazillions of times. And obviously that's very much what machine learning enables. So when we think about stocks and how we've approached them through AI, we're really thinking of machine learning as an extension almost of ourselves, the questions that we want to ask and the way we want to think about companies, and then go off and do all that research, compile it all, ensemble it, compress it, and use it then to evaluate things going forward. So when we think about stocks, with what we developed, we have, I think, 326 models on each stock, and a model could be as deep as forecasting forward 10 years of profit and calculating a price over intrinsic value. It could be sentiment analysis through news and social. It could be a whole host of different things, but they're quite deep models, if you like. And we set the machine learning to really learn the interaction between these 326 stock models over the data that we've compiled. The data took us about 2.5 years to collect and clean, which is about 1 million years of stock data. And it's very clear that machine intelligence really is better equipped for this kind of research, because I couldn't do, a team of 10,000 people couldn't perform the research manually that we do here. And when we think about essentially the research that is performed by machine learning, if one was to think of machine learning as a research mechanism, it does have the potential to, I mean, it's superhuman level, really. When we look now at like medical papers and stuff, and they ask one single question, let's just go back here. When we look at medical papers and they ask one single question, and they look at people over 5 years to see if they've died or not, it looks quite toy, it looks quite limited, which is also kind of interesting with regards to the level of human understanding being developed at companies like Google and Facebook, with their vast experience of, you know, presumably 1 billion years plus of human interactions per year. So Alba, this AI that we developed for this, is basically been like a 16-year journey. It's much more challenging than the optimization problem on the balance sheets. Really began with reading thousands of papers, hundreds of books, and doing hundreds of empirical experiments. It's kind of like the foundation. It's about 5 years of first principles, starting from the ground up and throwing away things to discover new frameworks, mostly statistical and Bayesian frameworks for how to really think about the problem. Then about 5 years into big data equities and starting to use GPU as well. This is going back about 8 years now. And new algos and methodologies. So you saw some of those just previously, some of those charts were using GPU and new algos developed for that. Then we've had about 4 years of kind of like live testing and repeated proofs, and it goes on and on. We've also got an interface on there now and a chatbot, but they took about a month. So it's one of these things that you find if you develop machine learning tools and solutions that, particularly with these complex problems, that most of the work is under the bonnet and unseen to people. So this is what we do here. This is the prediction results on unseen data for Alba. We broke it into 1,000 buckets there because there's a lot of data in there. So we're looking at every week, 1 year forecasts for about 20,000 stocks. And then we look at just the average 1 year US dollar total return of those stocks, bucketed into 0.1% buckets. So there's roughly 20,000 stocks, 1,000 buckets. There's about 20 stocks in each of these dots at each of those weeks, but you've got 20 years and you've got 50 weeks. So you've got about 1,000 times 1,000 observations of 20 stocks. You've actually got about 20,000 observations in each of these points, hence why it looks pretty smooth. But this is going forward on unseen data. So, and we've spent a lot of time being quite very precise about the data that we see, that it's point in time, it's not looking into the future. And just to say on this as well, like the various tests that we do on this as well is that we couldn't sort this accurately by chance. So if one was to simulate like 1 million times, ordering 1,000 buckets, you won't get something with this clear pattern or anywhere near it. So the other thing that we noticed with Alba is that the predictive accuracy is improving with time. By the way, this looks a lot more predictive than Alba would expect it to be, because it's over 20 years of data. It becomes a much cleaner what it's learning and how it's doing. But here we go back here, Alba learning predictive accuracy has increased when we look at which we measure through the correlation of Alba ratings versus stock total returns for that whole bucket of about 20,000 stocks that we look at, pretty much everything over $50 million market cap. So there's about 50,000 stocks globally, and we followed that down to about 20,000, which is the kind of like semi-liquid and above universe. And what we see, and this is a trailing 10-year correlation, but what we see is that correlation's gone up from about 6 to about 23% over that time period. Now, what that's telling us, obviously we've got a square correlation to get to explain variation, but it's telling us that roughly we're going from about 1% to about 5% explanation of what happens in the future. So it has markedly increased, starting back in the it starts in about 1974, going right up to present. That dip at the right, at the far right, is COVID, and there's various dips when market extreme events happen, and effectively the performance of stocks occasionally goes inverse to how the AI had thought they would be. Now, I just want to say a couple of other things that we've delved into ALBA, which is what we call our machine learning for stocks, using and I thoroughly recommend them. Shapley algorithms, and there's some other sets out there as well now that really enable you to make our AI explainable. We had to hybridize them slightly for how we measure things, what we're looking at. But what we discovered in using the Shapley algorithms is that actually the machine learning is thinking differently about each company. So here we have 3 examples: Tesla, Apple, and Berkshire. We actually have about 326 different factors we look at. These are from the top level factors, of which there's 10. Now, I'll draw your attention very quickly to 2, which is the middle one, shareholder treatment, which is how a company treats shareholders. Are they going to do buybacks? Are they going to pay dividends? And the bottom one, which is Bayesian forecast and surprise. Bayesian forecast and surprise in our world is all information that comes from the minds of humans. So it's things like analyst ratings, how well has it performed against prior expectations, buzz, perception, which are all now measurable using NLP. And there's many companies that provide that kind of data, or you can manufacture your own or do both. And what we notice if we look at that is that the relative factor importance, so how much of its forecast is being driven by that information set. If we look at Tesla, we're seeing 21.7%. We look at Berkshire Hathaway on Bayesian forecast and surprise, we see 12.2. So Berkshire Hathaway, which is more like a conglomerate and a quite predictable company run by Warren Buffett, and has very kind of easy to predict stable companies. The importance of what experts think and perception about the future is having a much is putting much less attention and importance into that than for Tesla, which makes sense to us intuitively, because when one thinks about Tesla, its valuation today is not based on today's profit. It's based on all of the wonderful things it might do, like it might make robots and put them in our houses. It might basically monopolize the car industry by taking over Uber because it's got the best data for self-driving, and then it can essentially sell cars as leasable vehicles that are essentially investment assets, etc., etc. We look at shareholder treatment, and we see it puts very little attention on Tesla and a great deal of attention on Berkshire Hathaway. But the big talking point with Berkshire Hathaway is what Warren Buffett will do with 50 billion of cash or more, I think, that's sat on his balance sheet. Yeah.
Sorry to jump in, but you've got 15 minutes left.
Oh,
I don't
sorry.
know quite how you're proposing to schedule your 2 talks, but
We'll get there. I'll fly through. Don't worry. Thanks for the pickup. So the ALBA factor importance here, what we see is when we look at these top level factors, we see a lot of variability between the different on a stock by stock basis. But I'll just draw your attention over to the top right here, which is that sentiment and surprise, and we see that 3 to 30% of influence is coming from data originating in the minds of humans. So actually, our ALBA, our AI, is a Centaur AI, which we'll touch on to Way's work. Now, I shall think about how to speed up a bit. I think I've touched on most of these. Let's jump forward a bit. Large learning problems, anyway. I think 2 that jump out where there's big data and to be honest, a real lack of the complex understanding of the mechanisms. One's the human body and one's our planet. And I think machine learning can offer some profound expertise for those. Barriers to developing AI, I think I've really touched on them. I think it's actually you get these ivory towers and you don't necessarily have access to the data or knowledge of the problem. Now, I want to jump in quickly to the live challenge, and then we'll fly through and get to UA as quick as possible. So live challenge here is we competed Alba last year, Jan 1st, against 18,000 professional research analysts. And we did that using a data set from Ayres, which is median analyst rating for all stocks over 50 million market cap. And we set about to compare them in two ways. One is to look at the effective stock ranking of stocks rated on the 1st of Jan and how that performed over the following year. And the other was to look at the performance spread between the portfolios of strongest conviction, top percent and top bottom 10%. So this is a little vid, but I might just take you to the end to speed up. And what we see here, this is the percentile buckets, the average relative stock performance by Alba for the stocks rated on Jan 1st, about 20,000 stocks, which produced about 90% correlation in percentile buckets, which is greater than the best that we would be observing 1 in a million and higher than the historic average. For analysts, actually, it came out negative at minus about 40% or something there at the percentile bucket. So they didn't do too well. Now, if we have a quick look at this, we can see that here. The mean analysts, you will see when we percentile their ratings, there's only about 61 levels of rating because they score between 1 to 5 and then you average between them. So you don't actually have, unlike the AI, where you've got 20,000 differentiated levels, you only have about 61 differentiated levels. But it's quite clear looking at them that the AI has significantly outperformed the analysts, which we see here, but this is the correlation at the single stock level. So this is very much in line with kind of average of what we've observed over the past 30 years and what we've observed live the last few years. The Z score is quite interesting because here we actually sampled 20,000 stocks. Well, the exact number actually was 19,340 that were looked at by Alba, and I think it's about 13,000 that were covered by the analysts. And we randomly order them a million times, and then we are able to see that this is perfectly fitting a normal distribution, and we can see the Z scores here. Alba, the AI, is better than the best in a million by some long way, with a 36 standard deviation and minus 2.6 for the median analyst ratings. The conclusion here is that the performance of the AI over 20, based on the rating of about 90,340 stocks on Jan 1st, the results were beyond chance. And there's actually, it's about 0.4168% percentile performance of median analyst rating. So there's strong evidence to suggest they were actually worse than guessing. Now we look at portfolio performance. So we look at the top 1%, top 10%, and bottom 1% and top bottom 10% for both analysts and the AI. And we see significant outperformance from the AI versus analysts. But we do actually see, funny enough, when we look at strongest conviction, some performance here from the analysts, which we'll get into in a second. That's the MSCI World Index, which is a pretty broad brush index covering global stocks. So when we look at the spread performance, top bottom 1% on the AI, we see 58.3 compared to 7.8 on analysts. So analysts have actually done quite fairly well here. Now, to put this into context, that's 193 stocks long and 193 stocks short, and the average difference. This is 1,930 stocks long, 1,930 stocks short. And you can see here, once you get top bottom 10%, pretty much we're not really seeing alpha at the analyst level. So if we look at the top 1% conviction, what we then do is sample 100,000 times to see what was like the best at 100,000. And we can see actually, again, the AI has outperformed the best of 100,000 different creations of long short, where we sample stocks without replacement and did it 100,000 times to create a portfolio of equivalent size. You'll see it's slightly larger here for analysts because there's less stocks, so there's actually a bit more deviation. Again, the same pattern here, the AI has outperformed the best in 100,000. So what we observe here in all is that the portfolios here, that again, the AI's performance has performed beyond chance. And the median analyst ratings have produced alpha, but which is outperformance, but there's insufficient evidence to suggest essentially that these strong conviction portfolios have not done it by chance because of the percentile performance of those portfolios. So the AI has essentially outperformed 18,000 research analysts, their collective wisdom when combining their median ratings to sort all the world stocks versus essentially one single AI, albeit that AI is over 50,000 ensemble AIs. But so I'll pass over to you, Ray. I think that's probably a good point for you to come in.
Oh, Jake, it's a very, very educational presentation. So I think to be mindful of time, I know that people schedule this event till 3 p.m. So I don't want to take too long. But thanks for passing along these slides. So I think what this slide is show is that it just like chess playing. The lower green graph show that in most of the time, a human analyst cannot beat a AI analyst. So we built our own AI analyst model. So you can see it's around 45% of the time, the human analyst would beat the AI, meaning AI wins more than half the time. But what is important to our research is that I think the purpose of researching AI is to precisely for it to enhance the value of and the quality of human life. So we are also thinking about how humans can work with AI. So we also built a centaur analyst, which is combining the wisdom of humans and AI. And that is the upper graph. And you can show that we show that if you combine the wisdom of human AI, then it will beat the machine consistently more than 50% of the time. Now, we'd like to look a little bit into the black box to see what differences does it make? In which situation are human beings superior, or which situations are machine more powerful? Now, here I did summarize some points that also for Jake to comment or respond, because I think Jake, after listening to your presentation combined with my own research, here's my thoughts. So I think machines and AI is very powerful when information is quantifiable, but humans do reserve a chance when we have to handle with intangible information. Now think about the Olympic figure skating that's right now going on. You can have a machine, an AI, to evaluate a player based on technical scores and get to the extreme precision that human beings cannot, and fairness that human beings cannot accomplish. But we still need to have a artistic score, because the performance is not just about jumping and turning, but also about the whole delivery. So you can also make this analogy into the typical high-level skill job. Now, the second issue is that, is it a theoretical solution or close to a theoretical solution? If there's a solution that theoretically exists, but we just have to have a many data and a very, very complicated algorithm to reach that, I would think, in those situations, the AI would win out. But in real life, not of time, it's not a unique solution, but we need to handle discretion. And in those cases, that's why, the human beings are still needed. Now, the third point is that we always say, to err is human, to forgive is divine. So what does it say? It says that the society as a whole, we are quite forgiving if human beings make mistakes, even make big mistakes, even when a plane crash. People are sad, people are devastated, but in the end, people understand human beings make mistakes. But if the same mistake were made by an AI model, by the machine, we're not going to tolerate it. This is why the threshold for auto-driving car is way above even the 95th percentile driving skill of a human being, even just for the social acceptance as well as the regulations threshold. So I think this also give human beings a designated spot in the table. Now, the fourth issue I want to point out is that whether the system has a feedback effect. Now, any AI, no matter how smart AI is a collection of codes. If it's a collection of codes, there's certain deterministic way in it, coded in it. And it's maybe half transparent, maybe half engineerable, but with enough time, people will figure out. So it's very, very easy, not very easy, but it's potentially feasible for the human beings to game at AI. But human beings know that they're being gamed at, they will change behavior accordingly, but the AI model would wait till the training sample to exhibit this kind of feedback effect before we're taking counter effect. So for example, in our research, we'll find, if you were asked human beings and machines to predict earnings, human beings doing better. But if you ask them to predict returns of prices, the AI could do better. because the earnings are determined to some extent. The corporate insiders have a lot of discretion, and they can make the earnings in order to feed into or meet the market expectation. While the stock price, the stock return, it's nobody has a control. And for this kind of objective impact, then AI could potentially wear out. Now, the last point I want to point out is probably, Jake also mentioned in his presentation, is the welfare effect for human beings, because we do not invent AI, we do not develop AI in order for the AI to be great. We develop AI in the end to enhance human welfare. Now, there's also a tendency for society to be over AI, meaning we are using AI to replace human beings, while from the societal perspective, that replacement is probably not the optimal thing to do. But from individual organization, for individual team, they might find it compelling or attractive to say, oh, this part we can be AI. So maybe we will see more, AI doctors, AI lawyers, in addition to AI teachers, but also predict the AIization might be a little bit over to the metric when they will maximize the human welfare. So, I think, this is my brief comments as well as questions to Jake. Maybe Jake, you can respond or discuss. We can also ask the audience to pose questions.
Sure. I think there's a lot in there to unpackage. I think the increasingly my own experience with machine learning is and thoughts about it are that I kind of moving away from that camp of thinking that even of AI as any kind of being, which I think has mostly been driven by conjecture and movies and media and things, but we seem to do that with AI. I think mainly because we personalize it, I think mainly because we haven't worked out where we exist yet, which is a matter of physics, a matter of religion, and a matter of other kind of existential and philosophical areas. And I think in a kind of the scientific society that we exist in, it's easy for us to say, well, you chop my arm off, but I'm still here, then I'm still here, and I can chop my arm off, but I still think, so I'm still here. So I then attach identity to how I think. And I think that how I think is due to my brain. And I think machine learning is like a brain. So thus we see it as something of a threat to our identity and as a kind of demystifying the magic that makes us human. But the truth is, from my experience, that really machine learning is just another technology that we're developing that will be used by us, for us as a tool. And whether or not it's used for good is really going to depend upon the wielders, as it has with all technologies through history. And it's a bit like when cars came, we still use our legs to get in and out of cars, to climb upstairs, to jump over hurdles, to climb up a mountain. We still use them, but we just learn how to use this new technology where it's better than us at certain things, like going on a motorway. And I think machine learning is definitely better at us at a lot of things. That it won't be sensible for us to have people devoting their lives to trying to do things that machine learning can do better. And I think that principle is applied for all other technologies. So that's my 2 pence on it. David?
Well, I'm just looking at the time, folks. I mean, we're basically down to the last minute. So I'm afraid I've got to go. I suspect other people might need to jump as well. But if people wish to stay around, and Wei and Jake are available, please do ask questions for them. But otherwise, thanks very much. It was super interesting. I think it's a very interesting area. Definitely, how to combine both people's predictions and or machines predictions and people's insights to improve on both of them. Maybe wait, just one quick question before I leave. Your graph that we're seeing, just out of interest, did you also plot the frequency with which man and machine beat man as well?
Yes, so man plus machine beat man will be by even bigger margin. So basically, man plus machine is the highest, machine is in the middle, and human beings is the lowest.
Okay.
So currently, it's no longer just like chess playing. It's no longer a myth that an AI analyst can be the average analyst. It may not be to the greatest analyst like Kasparov equivalent, but it can safely be to the average analyst.
Great. Cool.
Mm-hmm.
All right, folks, I'm afraid I need to dash, but please
Yeah.
stay around if Wei and Jake are available. Otherwise, thanks ever so much, everybody.
Thank you,
David.
David.
Good to see you.
Bye.
Yeah.
We can continue because I think there'll be people asking questions. So please continue that.
Yeah, Lopa, I wanted to really throw it open for people to ask questions or even to provide answers and really create it open.
Yeah.
So
Well, they can ask questions over here itself, so that's not a problem. So anybody wants to ask a question, they can go for it.
and I guess while that's happening, I just wanted to jump back on one thing that you said there, Wei, as well, which was that it's very interesting. You said about the AI being better at predicting stocks, but not better at predicting earnings. And funny enough, we thought exactly the same thing, and we use analysts to build the models of future earnings for each company, because that was really based on the realization that you'd need an AGI to really predict the future of a company, because you need to understand about the environment, the weather, the politics, the economy, the interactions, the trade, the agreements, etc., etc. And it just wasn't a thing that would be easy to do. So we leveraged the analysts for the future financials, but then ultimately train the AI to learn how to actually invest based on that, you see, or to predict based on that. So
Jake, I think there's a question.
There's a hand, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, this was early on in your presentation, but you mentioned about making accountable, say, national budget optimization problems. And I was just wondering can you go into a bit more detail explaining the accountability of such a structure? So for instance, would it be some kind of, let's say, loss function with 5 different components, and each component was suggested by a different expertise?
I guess that's to me. This is what I'm thinking about. It very much marries from the balance sheet problem, where essentially you would have objectives. So if you call it your loss function or function you're trying to maximize, whatever. The first question I don't think has been posed at government level, but I suggest should be, is to value what's the value of destroying a river for 150 years versus a child's education getting cut short because of funding cuts and thus they can't go to university because their parents can't afford it, versus all the other areas of which we can spend money. So I'm thinking out loud about how to solve it, and how to solve it. How I'm thinking right now is to have models. I guess in this particular case, to have a model for first of all the research done within each area of the optimal where you'd spend the optimal next dollar for the maximum marginal gain. But then also, once you then create that as an optimization problem, we need a way to translate value across different areas. So how do we translate like well-being? For example, what happens if you build an eyesore? A property developer makes a lot of money, but destroys a nearby forest, and all the people that use the forest. We should be measuring those impacts as well. I'm sure we all experience things where we say this makes no sense, but it was done because someone made some money somewhere. So having kind of, if you like, globally optimized optimization, it's a vast undertaking. It's not an easy thing. There'd be a vast amount of work that would need to be done. But to be honest, I can't see any other way to effectively optimize a nation than to do the work of measuring things, cross-translating those measurements. How do you cross-translate emotion into economic dollar into something else? But we need a way to do it. So what it also would raise is all the questions there around how to translate those things across against each other. So when you go back to another one I proposed there, which is actually the building of a true digital democracy, where we can all pick up our phone, touch a button and cast votes onto everything that impacts us and interact with each other in that way in a very organic manner. You could also then include the public in the setting of these objectives. So in the end, experts in the field, sole purpose who work in government would be to the obtaining of information and research to power these, if you like, these submodels, You would have a machine learning team that would correlate and collect all of that. And you could even then integrate the setting of the objective function and the translation of measures, because they are, in a sense, down to the beauty's in the eye of the beholder, right? Is it more important to be happy or rich? Is it more important to be healthy or I don't know, successful? Beauty's in the eye of the beholder, but at least you could take those eyes of the 60 million people in our country, or more or less in other countries, and actually begin to have human input into the setting of the objectives. Then at the end, no one's to blame. The only thing that would be to blame would be poor research or not seeing other things that should be measured. But you get a media article out, someone would pollute a river, and people go, crap, we need to measure rivers, add that in the system. Crap, we did this particular action and it's led to some other knock-on effect. We need to add that in the system, code it up, get research in, measure it, optimize it. That's how we can build a government that works. That's how we can optimize budgets, and by so doing actually begin to really make a country listen and hear to the experts, number one, but also to the people, number two, or number one, really. But get that kind of, get both of those things plugged into the system. Currently, I think what we have is we've had a problem for a long time. I mentioned this before, and I realized this looking at machine learning as an optimization solution. The problem that humans have been tainted with for so long is power. When you give one human the ability to make huge decisions that impact millions of people, they tend to make it for themselves. And we've suffered that for a very long time. And I don't know, I don't think people want to continue suffering that. I don't think it's in people's interest to keep operating as we operate today. But I do think that this is where also technology can have a profound impact upon society. And I think it's also where machine learning, or artificial intelligence, for want of a better word, can actually come to act as a guardian for humanity from ourselves. I mean, we only have to look at the animal kingdom, and you see if a primate takes control of a group, how they then would treat the other males, how they then would treat children that are not their own. We only need to look back through human history and see when a human becomes a dictator, all too often how they behave. There's an old saying, isn't there? Absolute power corrupts absolutely. What I think we give ourselves the ability to do through using machine learning as an optimization upon our own expertise is actually to remove the requirement of giving people absolute power, is to give the people the power, but also to operate that power in accordance and line with our best understanding at present. And I've had a friend who worked in like the civil service and quit after a couple of years because the research he was producing just wasn't affecting anything. It was, you know, there's other motives and reasons that people do what they do in government that aren't necessarily aligned to the people's well-being. It's a career after all, right? And a lot of careers, the deeper you go into professions, a lot of the time you realize the professional serves number one themselves rather than the customer or the company they work for. It's the smart companies and the smart customers that make the profession work for them. But if they don't, it bites them in the butt. And certainly with government, that is the case worldwide, as far as I can see it, apart from maybe some small tribes or something. But yeah, I'm not sure if I completely answered your question. If we,
No, it did. It's a good. I think it went through most of the points. Cheers.
But does it? I mean, do you see that as well? Is it?
Well, I think at the end of the day, like what you're saying is largely like looking at the sort of technocratic point of view. And I think when you go back to like people need some sense of identity and some sort of stakeholdership. I feel like building these models will be I think it's overwhelmingly complex to like take into account people's stakeholdership in a system and then build a model to encode that. I think it almost is like, I see so many unforeseen problems coming up along the way. That's my take on it.
Yeah, I think what's not measured is neglected. So I think it's even starting it out would be better than present. And I think if it was built by government, I don't think it would work for sure. I agree, definitely 100%. If it's built by government, it won't work. They spent, I think, billions for like the COVID app, and you know, I think they spent probably more money on the COVID app than Google ever had as investment. Or 100, I can't remember how much it was, but it's a crazy amount of money. But I think if it's built by the right people, I don't think it necessarily is that insanely complex. And there's no amount of insanely complex that machine learning can't optimize and solve for. But if we don't begin the work to measure these things, and if we don't begin the work to optimize these things, then we are choosing to neglect these things. And that to me is, it's like going to the gym when you're unfit, or cleaning, you know, de-weeding the garden that hasn't been weeded for millennia. Probably better to start than to just leave it as is. We don't measure things, we're not conscious of them really. And you know, how do governments operate now? How do and this is actually true also, like the corporation is very much like that we're looking at there before. We could see the clear path to optimizing the entire corporation, but the machine learning, you've got to understand, in this case it's not taking any decision making away. What it's doing is discovering and searching and discovering based upon all the information provided to it. So it's really just a tool that assists. And if we think back to the kind of digital democracy based approach, it would be a tool that everybody would be engaged in and influencing as well. So, but yeah, it's quite a way off. I think it would probably be easier in new societies to adopt this than current ones. And I think we probably are going to have opportunities in the next century for new societies as we go to, say, populate Mars and things like that, because eventually they will break off, they will form their own government, just as the US did, just as every country eventually does. So too will planets do that. So I think a lot of these, I think AI really operating at that kind of level is more likely to emerge in new states than in current ones, because they're just so old and so entrenched in how they operate. But I think there'll be a huge advantage to those future states as well, being able to operate that way. You know, because if we started from scratch today, I'm sure we'd do it. So, is there any more questions or thoughts from anyone? I can see there's still quite a few people there. I don't know if everyone's fallen to sleep or still there.
Yeah, does anybody else have any questions? I don't see any. But Jacob, I can ask them to get in touch with you, and if there is any question, I can send it your way.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah.
Thanks, Lopa. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Sorry
Thanks
about
a lot.
the Zoom login issues at the beginning.
No worries at all. It happens.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.